Let me begin and welcome you all. Thank you all for coming tonight. I know it is a very difficult week for the world and the Jewish community. This was very unexpected. And so I appreciate that you all have come tonight to be together to do the work that we have been diligently working on. I'm Rabbi Devorah Lin. I'm the co-founder and co-chair of Jewish Earth Alliance, and we have several members from our steering committee as well on the panel here, and we'll be introducing them later in the evening. So if you would please enter in the chat where you're calling from. I know I asked a bunch of people, but we'll be having more people coming on. And if you're part of an organization, and if this is your first time, maybe put a little star there and let us know that, so we can welcome you in particular. And I also welcome our familiar faces, those people who come and have been working with us these years. I'm sorry to say that Zelig Golden from Wilderness Torah, who was going to share with us some words of Torah at the beginning, is unable to make it tonight, but I hope he will join us another time. So in Rabbi Zelig's place, I would like to begin the meeting with a few words of inspiration. I want to start with a prayer by Rabbi David Wolpe. In reference to the troubles that have been going on this week. El Maleh Rachamim, compassionate God, we pray not to wipe out haters, but to banish hatred, not to destroy sinners, but to lessen sin. Our prayers are not for a perfect world, but a better one, where parents are not bereaved or children orphaned. Help us, dear God, to have the courage to remain strong and to stand fast. Spread your light on the dark hearts and your comfort to the bereaved. Let calm return to your city, Jerusalem, and to Israel, your blessed land. We grieve with those wounded in body and spirit and pray for the fortitude of our sisters and brothers, and ask you to awaken the world to the struggle and help us to bring peace. When I was in Jerusalem in 2001 and 2002, we had suicide bombers come every month, and then every week, and then every other day. I asked the head of the cantorial school at Hebrew Union College, where I was attending seminary, his name is Eli Schleifer, how he handled the stress of everyday bombs so near and so close. He answered that he goes back to work and looks closely at his Torah trope, those little dots and dashes and swirls under, over, and hanging from Hebrew consonants looking like vowels, but they are not. They are musical phrases ranging in length from 2 to 10 notes or so, and are what add punctuation and exclamation and hypnotic melody to our sacred texts that on the parchment, on the scrolls, are just a string of consonant letters, and thank God there are at least some spaces between the words. When bombs burst, Cantor Schleifer opens his tikkun, the book with his music. And the name of the book is Repair, Tikkun, like in Tikkun Olam. And he goes back to work counting the angels on the head of a pen. It sometimes seems a little bit ridiculous. But we too go back to work, repairing the earth, because it's our calling. And it's a relief from despair to have something that we can and will act on while the bombs are dropping. We know that no matter how long this fight goes on in the Middle East, the climate crisis will go on farther and longer. Rabbi Melanie Aaron on our steering committee reminded me that after our most famous line of liturgy, Shema Yisrael, we say the Ve'ahavta, V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavecha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'odecha. Many of you know it by heart. You shall love the breath of life with all your heart, lev in Hebrew, all your nefesh, which can mean soul or mind, and me'odecha. It's not an easy word to translate. With all your what? It means muchness, might, power, some would say, or effort. And some commentators say that this power, this me'odecha, is our money, our shekels. I was always taught that a budget reflects the values of a synagogue or a family. Put your money where your mouth is, we always said. Money holds a lot of power. For those who are coming together tonight live or coming to a later recording, this is our muchness, our me'odecha. In fact, this is our prayer power, gathering as a community to work on climate legislation together. This month in our action alert, we're watching the money and defending where it goes. Our speaker tonight is following the appropriation battles in Congress in spite of all the worries of this world on our minds. As our president says, we are fighting for the soul of the country. And where our taxes go is where our soul goes. I thank you for coming to learn what we can do to push that money in the moral direction. Because money is muchness, it's power, and it's might. And it also reflects very much so our ethical values. So I want to introduce tonight our speaker. Brett Hartl is the Government Affairs Director for the Center for Biological Diversity. Brett coordinates the center's work on federal legislative issues that affect endangered species, public lands, oceans, climate, and energy. He holds a bachelor's from Prescott College in conservation biology and a law degree from Lewis and Clark Law School. Before law school, Brett spent 5 years as a field biologist working with endangered species in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands. Oh, I don't know how to pronounce that. Kauai? Is it?
Hawaii.
Kauai, and Southern California. Always good, always wise to pick a beautiful place for your thesis, right? Prior to joining the center, Brett worked in the House Natural Resources Committee for the Democratic staff and was the Senior Policy Fellow at the Society for Conservation Biology. And tonight he's going to fill us in to try to manage these gigantic bills of appropriation. So welcome, Brett.
Thank you, Deborah. And obviously, I'm happy to delve into other interesting congressional things that are happening right now. It always seems like when I talk about Congress as it is now, and obviously I'll preface this by saying I'm obviously a very political person. I work for the Democratic staff for Ed Markey when I worked on the Hill, and I sort of wear my biases on my sleeve. We are now in this really strange and unprecedented period of time, especially in the House, where again today we have not seen a speaker get elected, which is completely unprecedented. So if we want to delve into other things, I'm happy to. I certainly know the House pretty well, having spent a year working there. I was tasked with talking about the appropriations process. I will try to do so using as few acronyms and sort of jargon as possible. But if I do say a word that's confusing, I'll try to keep at least one eye on the chat if I, say something that just doesn't make sense. Feel free to cut me off or interrupt whenever. I don't mind. I used to also teach college classes, so I'm happy for dialogue. So I'll try to at least start at the kind of constitutional beginning, just as a sort of basics of civics, so everyone has kind of a common understanding of of the appropriations process, which is, not particularly glamorous, but it's actually quite important. And just as Deborah said, this is oftentimes the most consequential bill that Congress passes in any given year is the appropriations bills, because it almost always reflects our values and is actually where most actual policymaking occurs. So it is very important, even if it might seem a little arcane and confusing. So at its core, the Constitution does basically say that all appropriations, which is basically the power of the purse and money out the door, is something that is an authority given to Congress. And there's another provision that also says that all revenues raised must also be legislated, and that is a prerogative given specifically to the House. So oftentimes, and this is kind of normal, the House of Representatives goes first in almost all of the appropriations processes because of that sort of constitutional structure of raising revenue and spending money. And then oftentimes then the Senate comes back and goes second, and they negotiate from there. But there is a constitutional reason why we fund our government the way we do, so it really can't be changed. And that, of course, leaves us at the mercy of our congressional appropriators. In terms of the budgets, and just to kind of put some of this in perspective, there's two general categories of appropriations or funding for the government. One is what's called mandatory spending, and then there's discretionary spending. Mandatory spending is things like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and other social safety net programs. And many of them are funded through different mechanisms that continue onwards, even if in any given year we fail to handle the discretionary piece. And proportionally in the budget, they are bigger. The mandatory spending pieces are something like 60 or 70% of all spending in a given year. So what we're really oftentimes fighting about is a relatively small piece of the overall budget. And as I'll sort of talk about in more detail in a second, when we're really fighting over is an even smaller piece of the budget, because there's sort of the current political dynamic being what it is, and obviously, it is important to support a robust military, but we spend a very large amount on the military. That is sort of off limits from the Republican perspective, as is raising taxes. And all that's left is what we call the non-defense discretionary budget, which is roughly 800-900 billion a year. So a little bit less than half of our overall discretionary budget. And in that 800 to 900 billion a year is where we see a concentration of attacks that are designed to cut funding to the government, even though from a sort of debt deficit perspective, it's like the smallest piece of the pie to try to like cut the biggest chunk of the overall budget. So you could cut the non-defense discretionary budget down to zero and still run a deficit and increase the debt. And Republicans rarely want to, acknowledge that. They just like the rhetoric of trying to get to like a balanced budget, and you just can't do it. So there's ulterior motives, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But anyway, so in the appropriations process, it is an annual process. They are looking at, again, the discretionary piece of the budget. For some reason, actually, I don't know the historical foundation of. We also do our fiscal years in Congress starting on October 1st, which is not a great strategy. Like, it's not based on the calendar. So we do from October 1st to the following September 30th is the fiscal year for Congress, which is why just a few weeks ago we had a showdown over government spending, because that is the deadline by which these appropriations bills must be passed every year. It is also the thing that triggered the ouster of Speaker McCarthy, which was also a first time ever thing that we did in this country, which had never occurred before. So every year there's a requirement in Congress to pass all the appropriations bills, and in doing that, they break down the overall budget into 12 appropriations bills. That's an arbitrary decision. It's just a historical anomaly, but we generally divide up the budget into these 12 large spending packages, one of them being defense, it's the biggest. And then we combine other agencies a little bit randomly, a little bit logically into the remaining funding pieces. And in theory, if the process worked completely normally, which I don't think has actually happened in about 30 years, each of the 12 bills would get an up and down vote in the House and Senate and be signed by the president. What is more common is Congress barely and oftentimes misses the September 30th deadlines, and ultimately wraps everything into one gigantic bill, which is often called the omnibus. Again, I don't know exactly why, but that is what we always call them. Those are, then just one giant bill, take it or leave it, sent to the president, eventually signed into law. When Congress fails to do that, that's when we have government shutdowns, partial shutdowns, depending on where we are with the budget. I have seen both, where some agencies were funded, some were not. Mandatory spending in these situations continues, but a lot of federal workers have to go without pay. The longest shutdown was in 2019 under Trump. That went on for 30-something days over the holidays. And it wasn't until the air traffic controllers basically threatened to go on strike that Congress resolved that impasse and funded the government. And each omnibus bill can often be several thousand pages long. So they're hard to track and hard to follow, which is a challenge for, I think, a functioning democracy, because it's not particularly an open process. They are oftentimes decided very, very late in the middle of the night. And this is true, and very few people get to read them, which is not a great way to legislate. Congress makes mistakes, there's drafting errors, things get slipped in that no one notices. The process does not seem to work that well these days. And getting back to the idea of values, because the way the rest of our laws work, which is once we pass a law like the Clean Air Act or the Endangered Species Act or any other normal law that you would think of if you were asked to name one, the laws themselves, even if they may sort of technically expire, and this is a little bit of kind of in the weeds, at some level that doesn't matter, because once a law is on the books, the law is on the books. The Clean Air Act will be on the books today, it'll be on the books tomorrow. It hasn't been reauthorized since 1990 or 1995, excuse me, and we didn't just stop cleaning the air. But you can stop funding the people who implement the law. And that's really kind of a key thing to think about, which is the law may be on the books, but if you do not have robust funding to pay for the staff to do the work that the law requires, that Congress requires of agencies like the EPA, you can effectively undermine that law's effectiveness and its ability to do what it was intended by simply leaving it understaffed on a particular thing. And we have seen historically over at least the last 30, 40 years, again, I'm biased, but a common Republican strategy is this idea of, and they always use terrible language, but it is starving the government so that, and shrinking it to the point that it's, they say it can be drowned in the bathtub. And that's kind of their language and rhetoric and philosophy, because they know that they can't necessarily undo the laws themselves, because the laws are actually broadly quite popular. Most people like clean air and clean water, endangered species, and civil rights and voting rights and all of these things. But if you make it really difficult to be a federal government employee, and you make it hard for them to do their job, then you can kind of accomplish an ideological goal in a sort of indirect and somewhat clever but also very cynical way, by simply cutting down funding. And like I said a little while ago, the funding piece, there's a lot of very disingenuous rhetoric around it, because the small pot that is our non-defense discretionary budget, which yes, $900 billion is a lot of money, but it's a big country with a huge economy. you can't balance the budget just by cutting that size. And they know this, but rhetorically, it's an easy thing to say because very few people pay attention to the weeds of how the actual allocation of money is spent in a given year. So their strategy has been kind of consistently over the last 20, 30 years to really focus on using the appropriations process to accomplish goals that they could not accomplish otherwise when it comes to the environment and other progressive social justice causes. And that's why it's important, even if it does seem kind of in the weeds and a little bit arcane. I'll say that maybe one good piece of news is once you have mastered the appropriations process or learned a little bit about it, it's kind of the same every year. So you don't have to relearn everything from scratch. It's basically the same 12 bills, the same line items of where money goes. You can compare year to year, and generally the Congress tells you what they're doing. They put their spin on it, obviously from either side, but it's at some level it's actually not that hard to pay attention to and to eventually kind of understand. You just have to kind of dive in there initially to get your handle around it. And in particular, I know that I was asked to talk about climate funding, so I will. I was going to get to that next. But before I do, I just want to say one other thing about the appropriations process, because it's also important. Oftentimes, we also see efforts, especially by Republicans, to introduce what are commonly known as riders or poison pill legislative items. These are this is particular language that singles out a particular thing for no funding or lots of funding. And there can be hundreds and hundreds of riders in a particular bill, especially when Republicans are in charge, targeting climate funding, targeting environmental funding, targeting voting rights, targeting, even these days, targeting, the Georgia District Attorney's Office in Fulton County for a particular criminal prosecution they are doing. And they become a negotiating and bargaining chip when they are ultimately trying to pass that bill. So when we think about climate funding, there's sort of two things to think about, and I see the question in the chat, so it's a good prompt for me to sort of get on point.
Yeah, good idea.
There's just two things you really need to know. One, in the arcane world of the budget, there is a process called reconciliation. You don't need to know the details, but it exists. The IRA was passed through reconciliation, and it's a 10-year funding bill. The funding itself in the IRA is not subject to appropriations, which is the good news. Even if Donald Trump wins next year, the IRA money is still there because the money is laid out over a 10-year period, and it can be spent and will be spent in many ways regardless of who's president. The bad news is, though, that it still requires human beings to do the work. And if you don't have, let's say, folks in the Department of Energy or the EPA, if they're not able to come to their desk or they're just crushed with work because, the IRA would require, let's say, 5,000 people to do it well, and Congress only sort of provides enough funding for 3,000 people, you can still hamper a program very significantly by just cutting back the staff. And what we have seen, especially very recently, is a very concerted effort to target the funding to EPA in particular, as well as Department of Energy, as well as the Department of Interior. They have seen year over year the smallest increases in funding sort of proportional to other aspects of the government, because Republicans have been sort of lockstep trying to limit the ability of those programs to grow budgetarily. So they're happy to increase the military 10% to keep up with inflation, but they only gave EPA 1%. So if you think about inflation and you get a 1% increase in a year with 10% inflation, it's actually a 9% cut in real dollars. So what we often see is attrition through not keeping up with the real cost of just keeping staff employed as a strategy, as an end run to get at the IRA. So my general message, and this is what we say on the Hill too, is one of the strongest ways of defending efforts to address climate change and other environmental issues is really just to support the agencies themselves. They don't have a lot of champions in terms of, to be honest, like even in the NGO community, we sometimes forget how important it is to just support their day-to-day work, even if it's not as great as it could be, because they are all public servants trying to do their jobs. But if they're just overwhelmed and swamped and understaffed, they're going to get behind. Congress imposes so many mandates on them, they can't possibly achieve them all. And if we don't sort of, I think as an entire community, advocate for very robust funding, we're going to keep falling behind. The EPA, just as an example, is still at a lower funding level today, if you take inflation into account, than it was under the Obama administration in 2008. So they've had a massive cut. They've lost like 6,000 employees. They're starting to rebuild, but they can only rebuild as much as they have money to rebuild, and that's a big challenge for them.
And what were
And
the
then
other
in the appropriations process
agencies?
too, there's a lot of policy riders that target the IRA as well, eliminating funding for them. There's going to be fights over that over the next few months. And that is where we see most of the battles. So that's why it's really important to engage. I would say, just as a matter of general advice these days, if you care about the climate funding, if you care about environmental funding, it's fairly obvious what position is better of the two parties. You've got one party that doesn't generally believe climate change is real, and you've got another that's trying to find solutions. And the more we can support that funding request, the better. And that's mostly EPA, as well as the Department of Interior's renewables program. Sorry, not Department of Energy renewable energy program. The Department of Energy, just as an aside, so 80% of their funding goes to the maintenance of the U.S. nuclear arsenal. There's a much smaller portion which only does renewable energy. So it's a very strange agency, as agencies go. It would probably be better if that program was somewhere else, but that's where it lives. So be it. So that program is important. And then the Department of Interior, which does a lot of conservation work on public lands and waters. Public lands and waters have a huge carbon sequestration potential if they're managed well. They can also be huge problems if not managed well. So there are, I would say those are the main ones that need the most funding. They are all of Interior and all of EPA is in what's called the Interior and EPA appropriations bill. And we should be supporting as high a number as possible. In terms of, and then I'll say this and then I'll stop. In terms of supporting agencies and their staff, I would just say it's hard to do directly as citizens, but you can always tell your member of Congress how much you support agencies, because they don't hear it enough. Right. And the work that they do, even if it's just a shout out to be like, we're happy that the EPA is here cleaning the air, lets them know that people care about the EPA being there.
Great. That's the kind of language we want to know. So what were the three agencies are EPA, Interior, and Energy?
Yes, the renewable, and for Department of Energy, it is a weird subset. It's just like the Renewable Energy Office inside the Department of Energy.
Yeah, well, they're very involved with the National Climate Assessment, I think.
It's just a strange agency, just so you're aware, because I know some organizations have positions about nuclear weapons, and I just want it to be clear at the outset that you have to be specific with the Department of Energy, because it is a strangely structured cabinet office.
Okay, so you started to get to some of the questions, so let's look at a couple more. So we've answered which agencies should we support? Those three: Interior, EPA, and Energy. This government finds solution. Let's see, specific. What's the best we can do to preserve funding in the IRA?
So again, the IRA funding itself is safe. The thing that's at risk is the staff to implement it. And that's the thing, again, to support. If EPA is understaffed, they're understaffed. And so making sure that EPA has staff to implement it is the most important thing, because the buckets of money are there. Those are available, but they can only be implemented if there's people to implement the grant programs and the tax credits and whatnot, because it takes human beings to run those programs, get those grants out the door, review applications, etc. And they are definitely understaffed.
Is it too complicated to explain why parts of it are in concrete and lasting for 10 years, but staff is not?
Like I said, it's because there's this weird arcane thing called budget reconciliation.
Yeah.
It's this procedural mechanism that only works when you have unified government control, and it allows for legislative actions that extend for periods up to 10 years. It's the mechanism that the George W. Bush tax cuts came in under and the Trump tax cuts came under, which both have 10-year horizons. It's because of very arcane budgeting rules. So, obviously, if we have unified Republican control, that's probably really bad for the IRA's longevity. But without worrying about that different problem, the money for IRA is there. The challenge is having the staff to actually do the work.
So Judy Zinger is asking, what bucket do this? We've got some talk going on about the subsidies to the fossil fuel companies, and what bucket do they come from? What bill or bucket?
Most subsidies are actually tax credits. Tax credits are not spending, they are revenue. They don't actually get changed every year. So most subsidies are actually parts of the tax code. The tax code is a different process, and I could certainly point you to it, but it's basically, that is a process that starts in the House. It's controlled by the Ways and Means Committee. And you have to change the tax code generally to get rid of the subsidies. There's very little, it depends how you define subsidies. There are probably small pots of money where the government is, like, let's say, approving a permit where the government pays for it, but that's because the government approves all of the permits, like on the Department of Interior side, but like they approve every type of permit because they have to. The overwhelming dollar amount, the sort of 40 billion a year, is almost all tax credits.
Judith Black is asking, regenerative farming and reforestation can sequester more carbon and right the water cycle more than any other actions. How do we push for these? Is that interior?
Yeah, right. So, just to be clear, like there's obviously lots of policy improvements that we would all like to see across the board to get us on climate solutions. That is sort of I would classify that as a substantive policy improvement that we desperately need on public lands as well as private farmlands and whatnot, and that is sometimes discussed in things like the Farm Bill, other pieces of legislation. The quirk of the appropriations process and why it is so kind of uniquely important, the Farm Bill only happens once every 5 years, and this Congress again has failed to do it. Appropriations have to happen every year. So it's not actually probably the place where you would address that type of policy. We probably will see riders trying to attack it from a sort of like, we're no funding for anything climate related, farming, land conservation practice. Like, you could do a rider that says zero out any staff money to address regenerative farming. Right now, the House Republicans, there's a website, if you want to check it out, it's a little bit hard to navigate. If you go to the US House Rules Committee, just like the rules of the road, Rules Committee, they currently have the Interior Appropriations Bill pending. There are 300 riders, 300 attempts by Republicans to cut funding for one thing or another thing for this coming fiscal year. It doesn't go on beyond it. It doesn't change the underlying law, but it does basically say you will not spend any money or people power on a particular thing. And there are hundreds of attacks.
And is there a second bill besides the Interior and EPA we should look at?
I mean, that's the most important, to be honest, in terms of approach. Again, the Department of Energy is important also. It's just slightly more confusing because of the way it's batched and the way the funding goes out. But they are targeting the Renewable Energy Office as well. That is another target. There are riders going after that. It's a very it's a very messy process. Generally, Democrats and the environmental community and the progressive community all basically say, look, we want clean appropriations bills. We don't want these poison pill riders. We don't want to see it all mucked up with this all this kind of garbage that is just designed to pursue your own specific ideological agenda. I should actually note, as a personal point of pride, for the first time ever, there's a rider in the Interior Appropriations process that simply says no funding for the Center for Biological Diversity, which is my organization.
Oh,
we don't
wow.
get government funding. So we're like, okay, but again, it just shows sort of the ideological vitriol that we often see, frankly, from the Republican House these days.
It's kind of like gluten-free orange juice, right? So Melanie is asking, where did you question? Oh, why do we hear about Republican efforts to strip the Inflation Reduction Act? What does that mean?
Those are riders that they're trying to insert into the Interior Appropriations bill. Again, they can temporarily, for like 2024, say no more funding for IRA. It wouldn't permanently undo the larger bucket. It would just say, in this coming year, we're not going to have any staff spend a dime on this. They can try to do a lot of things. Generally, the Democrats will stop them, but it's always kind of a dicey negotiation. And the price that the Republicans, and I know it's tough right now because I'm trying to avoid bad metaphors. Republicans are willing to shut the government down, right? They're fine with it. They're like, well, we don't need it anyway. Who cares? We'll let the 2 million federal workers go without pay for as long as it takes to get our demands. They don't feel any sense of obligation to being responsible. So ultimately, Democrats are in these really tough binds where, if you want to keep the government open and keep 99% of your priorities preserved, a few things sometimes do get sacrificed. Democrats are generally fairly good about protecting the core environmental issues, but we do lose one or two things a year because it is such a sort of difficult and highly partisan environment. And if one side doesn't care about shutting down the government, that gives them leverage because they're kind of nuts.
All right, let me try to ask, let's see. What was that? Oh, this Judy Burlfine's asking, don't the Republican, like in Texas, I hear they're really big on renewable energy, or they have the biggest solar farms. Don't the Republicans have a lot of jobs in renewable energy in their states? Do their constituents care if they cut all the funding?
I mean, I don't want to sound cynical or mean, but I mean, one of the worst consequences of gerrymandering is that most districts, it simply doesn't matter. And most Republican members of Congress are willing to take the money, tout the money that they voted against, tout the benefits that they decry, because they know they won't pay a political price, because in the primaries, they vote for the most extreme, and then in the general, it's not really close in 90% of districts. So it's hypocritical, and yes, it undermines their own constituents, and Republican voters often vote against their own self-interest. Historically, it has not. I mean, I'm overgeneralizing, but I've never seen a scenario where it's ever actually come to result in accountability, unless it's a very, very kind of even 50-50 district, of which there are only maybe 30 out of 435 in the country. I know that sounds terrible, but it does seem to bear out, despite the completely rational point that was just made.
Yeah. It's a big country, a messy country, and you don't want to see how bills are made, right? Sausage or bills. Thank you so much, Brett. This was clear and helpful for us, and gives us some things to focus on in such a big bill and such a big project as appropriations.
Yeah, I'll just note too, there's this thing called the Congressional Research Service, CRS. It's actually the Librarians of Congress. They run the Library of Congress. They also put out an enormous number of very digestible reports on virtually every aspect of how Congress functions, as well as many other topics. A quick Google search, you could find everything you've ever wanted to know about the budget and appropriations process, and at any level of detail. So that's a good resource. And obviously, most of the NGO community has action alerts these days, or will be putting out action alerts as we get closer. the next crisis is November 17th, and then probably again around Christmas, New Year's, and then probably again around April. So, there will be many opportunities to engage on this. And if you need direction, I would say you could go to like a lot of our websites. They have current, sets of actions that are going on, and you can find info there. I don't want to take any more time. I'm not actually sure what HB 589 is, but I would say if it's a freestanding bill, it probably isn't going anywhere.
Sorry, Judith. Yeah, thanks very much. Amy, take note of that link to the Congressional Research Service for our action alerts. That sounds like a great resource. All right, well, thank you very much. We're gonna move on to our action alert tonight to get people to actually commit and communicate with their members of Congress. So I hope you will stay with us. Thank you so much, Brett. That was really informative. We appreciate you spending this time with us. Let's see. Oh, I wanted to say a big thank you to Melanie Aaron for coordinating the lobby day at Tisha B'Av with Lillian Feingold Sachs, our intern. And she's going to, it was a wonderful success. We're very proud of all the people who stood up and showed up. And Melanie's going to show us and talk to us about that day and its accomplishments. So there you go.
All right, well, thank you. I know we're all eager to act, but yesterday was Rosh Chodesh Cheshvan, the beginning of the new Jewish month of Cheshvan. And that means that Tu B'Shvat, our winter lobby day, is not that far away. So we want people to begin thinking about January 25th and about organizing groups in their area. And maybe to motivate that a little bit, I'm going to share some slides about our past event, which many of you participated in. So we've got some wonderful photos. Here we are visiting with Georgia's Senate offices, Senators Warnock and Ossoff. We have only screenshots because we're virtual lobbying, but it's great to see people together and the variety of our members participating. We were also really fortunate. Senator Mike Braun from Indiana, Republican, had a meeting with constituents, but representatives of the Jewish Earth Alliance were the only constituents who showed up. So we had a great opportunity to speak with him, have a meaningful conversation about our issues. We have some very nicely populated screenshots from California and South Carolina, two individuals of real distinction and importance, Senator Feinstein of blessed memory, and Rick Scott, who's been involved in the Republican Party. Moving along, we have lots more screenshots, but I didn't want to bore you with slide after slide after slide. But if you're in one of them and you want to get a copy of that screenshot, just let me know. We also have meetings that we had with Senate offices where we didn't have the opportunity to take a screenshot. So what I'd like to ask you, you see we had over 200 participants. We saw a lot of members of the Senate or their office staffs. I'd like to ask you to begin thinking about Tu B'Shvat, about January 25th, to reach out to those who might be in a group. We have reached out to the team leads, and they have themselves reached out to the people with whom they began building relationships, and have also urged our members to reach out so that when we contact these staff members again to set up those appointments in January, they will remember us, they will remember our issues, and they will be all set for our next lobby day. In terms of what we'll be lobbying on, it's a little bit more difficult with the current state of Congress to know, will the government be open? What will be happening come January? But we are continuing to work on it. And our program tonight gave us some important things to think about. So closing words, January 25th is not so far away. Building a team of 6 to 12 is ideal for the screen. for the virtual meetings that we hold. And I look forward to working with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. That's terrific work. And if you'll probably be looking for another intern to help, is that right? So if anybody on the call has a burgeoning,
Skilled college student, we're glad to talk about
a computer skilled college student, that would be terrific. We also had a wonderful day on Capitol Hill, going up and down the hallways, those marble hallways, and we delivered Rosh Hashanah cards. I think it was 40 offices. Melanie, do you remember? Is it?
I think it was a little more than that. I feel like it was over 50 different offices in the House and in the Senate. So it gave us an opportunity on both sides. And we had responses from all over the country, which was great.
Yes. So, and we were so excited to get back to beating the pavement in Congress. Okay, now I'm going to turn it over to Judy Burlfine, who is going to lead us and instruct us on contacting our members of Congress tonight on our action alert on the appropriations. Oh, where are you going? There you go. Got to turn on the lights in California. Okay, you're on, Judy.
Okay, hello everyone. It got dark in the meantime, or a little bit dark. So Amy, can you go ahead and share thank you. So we're going to take action now. For those of you who are new, we'll tell you more about it. And those of you who've been here before, you know what's involved. But before we take action, I wanted to make sure all of you know about these amazing action alerts that Amy and Mirala put together every month. And if you could physically raise your hand and tell me if you have seen these before, to get an idea of who's here and who this is brand new to. Okay, I don't see a lot of hands going up. So let me tell you, this is a very in-depth look at each month we focus on a different issue. Often we'll come back to one that we've written on before, but so it's broken down. If you're on our email list in our newsletter, there will be a link to this action alert and you can download it, and all the information with amazing links are here. It starts out about taking action and what the overall theme is, but then we offer background, we give some Jewish perspective. So when we write, we can let our members of Congress know that the Jewish community is speaking out on climate issues. And then there are several links where you can learn more if you want a more in-depth focus. And then we have a sample message to your member of Congress. So tonight we're going to take action at the meeting. We have a very, very, very simple one-sentence sample message, but I urge you to take these alerts to your groups, to your temples, and use them as an opportunity to educate your green team or social action team about what our work, and you can all sit around together and write longer letters or emails. So
I want to say, Judy, that it looks complicated, but it actually is beautifully summarized. And we have all these links over on the right side for government nerds and geeks. If you really want to get into depth, you will find it here. But if you just want to write a few sentences to your congressperson, you'll find it in the sample message. So I don't want you to be intimidated by it.
Very good point. So it can be as in-depth or simple as you want it to be. So if you want it to be simple, you'll love our next slide. Okay, so what we're going to do now is everyone is going to open up another tab on your computer and go to your senator's website. Before you do that, let me just run through what we're going to do once we get there. On the website, there's always an option for contacting your senator Or if you don't want to go on the website, you can also call them at this number that you see here. And we're going to contact our senators now. And after you hang up, we urge you to also contact your representative. And here's the message. We urge you to reject devastating funding cuts and defend climate solutions in the fiscal year 2024 budget. Now, we learned from Brett, it's a little more nuanced and complicated, but this gives the overall message, and this lets your member of Congress know that you're out here, you're paying attention. They passed the IRA last year, let's implement it. So I urge you to, like I said, open up a tab. If you're in California, I think we have a lot of you. You can go to padilla.senate.gov and you'll get Alex Padilla's website. And then
I think you have to go up to view and put it on not full screen first in order to open up another window, right?
yeah, or some people can open up a separate browser. It depends on how it works. Yeah, but that's true. So go ahead and do that. And once you get there, find the contact button and you can write your own message, but if you want to copy this message exactly, that's fine. And if you have questions, feel free to either put them in the chat or unmute and ask directly.
Hi, Judy.
Yes.
It's Maureen. I just want to make a comment. You know, some of us have used the Jewish Earth Alliance, the information packet you just referred to, and the sample letters, and they're really fantastic. They've been easy to use. We've used them many times, and that, you know, you can make a phone call, but I'm saying if you want to use the template or the sample letters, they're really great.
Thank you, Maureen. That's wonderful. Now, I am looking at our new senators page, and it looks like she's just getting up to speed, but there is right on the homepage, there's an opportunity to send a message. So you can go to, but if you're in California, you can go to butler.senate.gov to submit a message. And once you've submitted your message, go into the chat and let us know that you sent it so we can all share in celebrating everyone's achievements.
How are we doing, everybody? Let us know your progress.
Well, I was just utterly appalled to find out that Elizabeth Warren doesn't have climate or environment on her drop-down menu.
Wow.
Ouch.
Wow.
Ouch. That's a surprise.
Yes.
Did she have,
She's your senator?
Yeah, Massachusetts.
Massachusetts. Wow.
Warren and Markey. Markey, every one of them is climate and environment.
Yeah. We just delivered cards to him the other day, and I guess to Elizabeth Warren too.
does she
That's-
have, what did you say? She doesn't have climate or?
Doesn't have climate or environment on her drop-down menu. Neither does my congressman, Seth Moulton. He has environment, but not climate. We've been bugging him for a long
I
time.
wonder if it's under appropriations because she's an
Oh.
economist, right?
Or just under budget, but yeah.
Yes, we do want you to say you're members of Jewish Earth Alliance. They know us. And believe it or not, well, a religious a voice connected to a religious organization is a respected voice.
Mhm.
Trusted, that's what they call it, trusted voice. So it's a good thing. Oh, good, you wrote Padilla and Butler. Ah, you know what? We found out Butler's office is not open yet because she doesn't have staff yet. But they are collecting letters and et cetera, et cetera. We gave all of the Rosh Hashanah cards to Padilla, and they said they would deliver them when she opens her office.
So should we send them to her in care of him, or what are we supposed to do then?
Well, if you're sending an email, then I would send it to Butler.
But if it's a phone number, she does not have a phone number yet, or does she?
That I don't know about. I bet she does. She
Okay,
might have people
yeah,
working
you would
remote.
think she would have the former one, yeah.
She has a website.
Because I think Padilla took over Kamala Harris's, I think.
Right. Right.
So she does have a website, so I would recommend that you send her an email on her website. We may be some of her first emails she's received. So Amy, I think you wanted to say something and people are starting to drop off. So why don't you go ahead?
Yes.
Amy?
I wasn't looking at the time. Amy, did you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk a minute about the action alerts because there seemed like there was a little bit of confusion.
Okay.
Action alerts are for the Jewish Earth Alliance Network. They come out once a month and focus on one piece of climate legislation that you can use that we want to lobby members of Congress. We feature the action alert in our bi-weekly newsletters, but they can also be found on the Jewish Earth Alliance webpage.
Great.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah.
We try to make it easy. And also we have a Facebook page. And we have two wonderful people who are monitoring it. And, forgive me, I don't have their names in my head yet, but they're terrific. And we've been adding things on our own. So, well, congratulations to everybody for participating and for coming tonight. You know, it hasn't been an easy couple of weeks, and so I appreciate you all showing up and standing up for climate. There's so many other distractions going on. Thank you all for sending these messages to your members of Congress. So tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, my friends, keep pursuing and pursuing justice for our home, our country, our earth. Let calm return to our nation and our world and our precious earth. May this war and threat end soon, and the wounded be healed and the missing returned, and all us earthlings shall sit under our vine and under our fig tree, and there shall be no one to make us afraid. May you have a lovely evening, and may your sleep be deep and restful tonight. And thank you all so much for your wonderful work.
Okay, he